One of my favorite recipes to make in the dehydrator is kale chips. I love the flavors that I can create in there. I love how I get to use kale because it's a dark leafy green, and I love how it lasts a long time because we dehydrate it. Today I'm going to show you how to make a Thai barbecue kale chip, and I'm really fond of both of those flavors. And it's all going to take place in our high-speed blender. And I'm also going to talk about a few things that you could do on your own, but it's not necessarily what I do in this recipe. It's just things that I thought of today, and you'll get to see how a chef's mind works as I go over this recipe. I'm going to start with one bunch of kale. And what I noticed right away at the store is when I bought the bunch, because a bunch doesn't buy the weight, and it's not really a specific amount every single time. So I noticed the bunch wasn't that much compared to another bunch I got of green curly kale. So I have a zucchini in my fridge. I've been wanting to use it up somehow. So what I'm going to do is take a ceramic slicer and make these little discs of zucchini, and then when I make the batter for the kale chips, I'm going to pour it on top of the kale and the zucchini, and then when I dehydrate it, there'll be these delicious dehydrated zucchini chips in there as well. So that's pretty awesome. If I'm using a recipe and I notice that the kale is less than before, I don't want to have to all of a sudden change the ingredients in my batter. So what you can do if you run into this scenario is throw in a little bit of an extra vegetable that will dehydrate well with the kale. So all I have to do now is just take this over my bowl real quick and start making these super easy slices. I'm going to play with a few sizes just so there's a little bit of texture, extra texture in this recipe. I'm making sure to hold up at least halfway from the zucchini before doing this. I should be using a safety glove, but I use sharp tools on a daily basis in the kitchen. Now I have all this kale and zucchini that I'm going to pour my batter on. And when I say batter, this is the mixture we prepare in the high-speed blender, and it changes anytime you do a different flavor. But basically, whenever I make kale chips, it's some sort of bowl of kale and maybe some other vegetable like we're using today, and then whatever I put into my high-speed blender. There's a few components that I always think about when I make a kale chip recipe. First is going to be what I call the base, and this is usually also the protein or fat, and it usually is a half cup or less. I like a half cup because that's going to make these pretty calorie dense, and it's going to give me more energy to run on. I'm someone who's very active. What I'm using today is a 1/4 cup of pepitas that have been sprouted and they're already dehydrated. You can buy these in the store like this. And then I'm using a 1/4 cup of hemp seeds. And the 2/4 cups equals a half cup. Next, I'm gonna use something that's gonna add some sweetness. And there's sweetness in barbecue because you wanna balance out the smoky and the sweet and the savory. What I'm gonna use in this recipe is gonna be some chopped dates. I've got a 3/4 cup. That's also gonna give them a chewy quality. 3/4 cup of sun-dried tomatoes. You're gonna wanna soak your sun-dried tomatoes, and so here's something I just decided to do today. I had extra coconut water in my fridge from busting open some coconuts, and since this is a Thai barbecue, I thought the sweetness from the coconut water would be good in this recipe. So instead of soaking them in water, I soaked them in the coconut water that I'm gonna put in here. And soaking the sun-dried tomatoes just helps them process faster and more effectively in the high-speed blender than if I was gonna put them in dry. The concentrated flavor of sun-dried tomatoes brings a savory component that really makes this stand out like it's barbecue. Next, I'm gonna add my salty component. I'm gonna add a tablespoon of coconut aminos and a tablespoon of some miso. Let's begin to add the spices and the other ingredients that are gonna give it the really complex flavor that's gonna be not only Thai but also barbecue. In here I have a teaspoon of cumin and I have a teaspoon of paprika, which is gonna give it some more of a smokiness. And then I have a 1/4 teaspoon of habanero powder. And I like my recipe spicy, and so it's kind of a Thai habanero barbecue kale chip. I'm gonna throw in a chunk of ginger. This is about just under a tablespoon. I don't need to chop it because the blender is gonna take care of that. I'm gonna do 1 teaspoon of liquid smoke. This is gonna help with the barbecue flavor and the smokiness. One ingredient today that I'm using that I would consider a secret ingredient, so if someone was gonna taste these, they're gonna wonder what's making all this delicious flavor. And this is one ingredient you wouldn't think of. Normally in the barbecue recipe that I made in the past, I use apple cider vinegar. I have been experimenting with these infused balsamic vinegars that are really delicious. So today I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of a pineapple white balsamic. And this is gonna give it kind of a tang component, which if you think about good barbecue flavor, it's kind of tangy and smoky and sweet and salty. Really complex flavor that I really, really enjoy. Another thing that I'm doing today is there's not much kale stems. If you watch my recipes, you know I like kale stems. So I'm just gonna throw them into the blender. This literally looks just under a half cup. Adding these kale stems is just gonna bring in more fiber, whatever nutrients are left in the stems, and it's gonna give a little bit more body to the batter, which is gonna make them chewier, which I like as well. Now I just gotta pop on my lid. Just a little bit thick, which is totally cool. I just had a little bit of water to thin it out. Water is also gonna help when I spread it on. You can't really go too thin. You could probably get so thin it was so runny you couldn't spread it on, but you would be able to prevent that from happening. Adding just a 1/4 cup of water is gonna also make it a little bit easier to spread on top of this when I have to marinate everything and cover it. Now I just need to put this into my bowl on top of the kale and the zucchini. I would make sure to make this recipe once first without kale stems. The kale stems are definitely gonna add more of a bitterness, and I want you to experience the sweetness of this recipe before you add those in. I'm someone who wants to cram as much nutrition in my recipes as possible, so sometimes I'll throw in stuff that's gonna change the flavor, where if you were to make that recipe for the first time doing it that way, you might not like it or appreciate the flavor. Next, I'm going to spread this all out on 2 Teflex dehydrator trays. I found 1 bunch of kale covered in the amount of batter that I typically use is going to cover 2 of these sheets. And sometimes it gets a little crowded, and I have gone over into 3. And you'll have to do that if you have lots of small pieces. If you've eaten kale chips a lot, you might have discovered, like me, that you can get a really, really chewy recipe, and you can get ones in the store that are really, really, like they just turn into dust in your mouth. And they're good, but they just are kind of like chips. They start to crumble and dust forms at the bottom of the bag, and they're not chewy at all. I typically like a chewier kale chip because it just means there's more stuff there. The dates and sun-dried tomatoes, hemp seeds, pumpkin seeds are all gonna be adding a lot of bulk and body to this chip, so it's gonna be chewy. It's gonna fill me up more than those potato chip type kale chips. And I'm noticing, laying these out, just how sticky of a batter this is compared to this amount of kale. That's something to keep in mind. If you ever get to the point where you feel like you have too much of your kale batter, all you'd have to do is go into your fridge and grab some other veggies. I'm gonna do another thing that is something that I just consider as what a chef would do. I have a little bit of this batter left, and it's quite a bit. And since these are such covered chips, I don't wanna just throw the batter in there. So I'm gonna put about a 1/4 cup of rolled oats in here. And just stir them in this bowl and coat them with all the remaining batter. Now, why would I do that? Well, I don't want to waste the remaining kale batter, but now I'm just going to spread these clumps of oats. So this has now got the texture of a granola, and I got a savory granola that I'm going to dehydrate with the kale chips, and that way I can determine what this flavor would be like on oats. And then in the future, do I want to make a Thai barbecue savory granola? And it's just giving me a way to taste the flavors that I created in my high-speed blender on a different, we'll say, substrate other than the kale. Now I'm just gonna pop these in the dehydrator, and it's gonna probably take 24 hours because they're so wet. And the good thing about the dehydrator is I just check and make sure they're completely done. So I'll let you know how long it takes and then let you take a peek when they're all finished up. I'm back, it's the next day, and this is what we have left. I've eaten about a quarter of each tray just by checking on them. These are extremely delicious. They have a really good chewy quality to them that I really enjoy. And you can see that the slices of zucchini that I made just kind of dehydrated with the kale. And this big chunk has a little bit of the granola that I threw in there. And I ate most of it. The granola turned out great. There was just these big clumps of savory, crunchy granola that had a barbecue flavor. So you can't go wrong there. And basically, what I want to leave you with after this recipe is experiment with your recipes, have fun, and use your intuition. And ideally, you experiment with a recipe once so you know what to expect from the flavor, then you can start to change it. I have made this Thai barbecue one many times before I threw kale stems in, and before I did pineapple balsamic vinegar, and before I threw the oats in. I would omit the kale stems the first time so you just get an idea of what the flavor's like. I also, when I was tasting the batter after I put the kale stems in, it was a slightly bitter that I noticed, so I put in 2 tablespoons of molasses. I thought molasses would be a nice sweetness for the barbecue flavor I was looking for, and that really turned it up a notch to a really good flavor. I don't think you'd need that if you didn't put kale stems in, because you wouldn't have that additional bitterness. And if you run in the scenario where you're making kale chips and you find that the amount of kale you had is not as much as you thought, it doesn't look like it's going to cover 2 sheets, then add in another vegetable of your choice. I'm gonna put the recipe down below of the basic one, and then I'll let you know the modifications I made as well. The sun-dried tomatoes and dates really make this a chewy kale chip, so expect that. It's not going to dehydrate at all to a crunchy chip that you can just break apart. It'll stay chewy and pliable because of all the dates and sun-dried tomatoes. Really delicious. Let me know what you think. If you like these recipes, give me a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching the video.